Okay, let's start tonight with this idea of OSHA. When we talk about OSHA, what is OSHA? We throw that term out, but what is it?
It helps protect the employees from hazardous conditions that the employers face.
Yeah, OSHA in its, and we'll talk and break it down into a little more detail than that, but yeah, you're absolutely right. OSHA is basically a law that is there to protect employees against hazardous working conditions. That's the nuts and bolts of it. And we're starting really a new unit, if you will, on employee protection laws, or laws out there designed to protect the employees in one way or another. All right? And we're going to start there with OSHA and how it protects. And as Dave says, it protects employees in part by having laws out there that say, hey, if you're going to be working in a hazardous place, we want to make sure that it's not so hazardous that it's just completely dangerous. We want to make it as safe as we possibly can. All right? What else do you know about OSHA? Anything else? Yeah.
It provides training, assistance, and information to
Okay.
employees.
All right. It's going to provide training, assistance, and we'll break that down. Whitney.
It's not every company is required to follow OSHA guidelines. Like, for example, my shop, we are not subject to OSHA guidelines.
Okay. And do you know why?
Because we have, like, if so for so many employees, isn't it 50 or
Okay.
more or something?
Yeah, you got some stuff that may be there, may not be there. It depends on the various nature of the type of work you're at. So not every place necessarily has to follow OSHA, although most have to provide some kind of safe workplace.
For our shop, which I wonder, like for our shop, they contact me all the time and try to come in and do a voluntary inspection.
Okay.
But then I've heard that means then I'm kind of subject to them coming in, pop in on me and check out on me. But
Yeah.
I always let like NAIC or whatever that is, the workman's comp people, they come in and do an inspection, but it's not OSHA guidelines.
Okay.
So.
And if you have a death, you may see OSHA out there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because I'd be a little surprised if OSHA doesn't cover what you guys do.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd be a little surprised because it really applies to most workplaces, and we'll talk about that again in a little more detail. All right, anything else is a preliminary. All right, so when we talk about OSHA, this is the occupational, it's called, and you'll hear me say OSHA twice. There is OSHA, the Occupational Safety Health Act. Okay, so that's the law itself. And then in a minute we'll talk about the agency. All right, so you'll know immediately which one I'm talking about. But when we talk about OSHA, what we're going to talk about tonight is the Occupational Safety and Health Act. And this act was basically passed in 1970, so it's a relatively older law, okay? And when it was passed, it had two basic goals in mind. There were two basic goals that this law wanted to accomplish. One of those, as Day has kind of hinted on, was to assure safe, healthy work conditions. All right. So OSHA is passed with the primary purpose of assuring safe, healthy working conditions. And part of that gets into the things that we'll talk about as far as, different hazards. Give me an example of a place that may be, as we look at that, give me a place that may be hazardous.
Hospital.
Pardon, Melissa?
Hospital.
Hospital. Okay, let's talk about a hospital. Why may a hospital be a hazardous place to work?
Needles.
Needles. Okay. All right, you may have needles. And so there may be some requirements that OSHA deals with regard to needles. Why else? What else may be hazardous?
You can come in contact with other people's blood.
Okay, you can come into contact with other people's blood. All right. Other industries that may be. Patrick?
I know OSHA is pretty big on like roofing companies in regards to like harnesses and belts on top of roofs.
Okay, right. They want scaffolding, they want harnesses. As Patrick says, roofing, construction. You're going to see OSHA big in construction. You're going to see OSHA. We had a death situation where a guy was unloading a truck full of lumber, pulled out one of the pieces of plywood, and guess what happens? All of the pieces of plywood fell down and killed it, all right? OSHA was out there very quickly to see what was going on. So that's kind of what OSHA does. They want to make sure that there's a safe, healthy working environment, all right? That's goal number one. But the second goal of OSHA is also to engage in research, education, and training, okay? So it's also to engage in research, education, and training. Now, here is what we call the employer's requirement is basically a general duty. All employers, the law provides, OSHA provides, that all employers have what we call as a general duty, all right? That general duty is basically this, that employers are required to furnish a workplace that is free from recognized hazards, all right? So when you talk about general duty, OSHA comes along and it sets a general duty upon all employers, and that general duty is to furnish a workplace that is free from recognized hazards, all right? Now, what is a recognized hazard? Tom, let's go back to hospitals. What's a recognized hazard in hospitals?
All the, like, my mind's going everywhere, sorry. Coming in contact with someone's blood, the needles.
Okay. Coming in contact with somebody's blood, coming in contact with needles, all right? That's going to be a recognized hazard of a hospital, all right? What is not a recognized hazard of a hospital?
Staph.
Darla?
Staph infection.
Yeah, you shouldn't get a staph infection. Although these days, if you go to a hospital, you got to watch out for it, all right? So that may or may not be a recognized hazard, okay? But probably in terms, if OSHA were to control that, probably would be a recognized hazard just because it's more common. Now, had you said that 20 years ago, yeah, probably not a recognized hazard. But even then, maybe, okay? Give me another example. Patrick.
Are you trying to get it like slipping and falling on wet floors? Is that
Yeah, could be, all right? And let's take that. Let's say you've got a kid that's visiting his dad at the hospital, and he brings in his bag full of marbles, and he dumps them on the place, and now somebody slips and falls on him, all right? That is not a recognized hazard of being in a hospital. Slipping on water may be, and in fact, they have all kinds of restrictions, regulations with regard to the chemicals that you use and things of that nature. But yeah, slipping and falling may not be a recognized hazard. Certainly the more far afield that we get, it's not going to be a recognized hazard, okay? So the duty is not to protect from all hazards. The duty is not to protect from every injury that may occur. The duty is to protect, and the key is recognized hazards, all right? And a recognized hazard, just to define it, is one known to be hazardous, taking into account the standard of knowledge of the industry, all right? So it's one that is, a recognized hazard is one that is known to be hazardous when you take into account the standard of knowledge of the industry, all right? Give me other examples of a situation, or somebody give me an example of a situation where today there may be a recognized hazard that 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 15 years ago, there was not a recognized hazard. Jackie?
The dry cleaning industry.
Okay.
People ending up with cancer.
All right.
Like lung problems because of the chemicals they use.
Okay. Jackie talks about the dry cleaning industry. Do you have a case on that, Jackie, or is it just?
No,
They
I
just-
think I probably saw it on like a TV.
Okay.
Quite frankly.
All right. All right. Well, no, it can be a good example. The dry cleaning industry, all right? Chemicals that were used in the dry cleaning industry 20, 30 years ago, nobody may have thought anything about it. Now, if there's a link to cancer, and based on the knowledge of the industry, if people know that this chemical used in dry cleaning is going to cause cancer, then it may be a recognized hazard now, all right? So just because it wasn't always a recognized hazard doesn't mean it can't be a recognized hazard at some point, all right? Now, employers are also required, in addition to this general duty requirement, employers are also required to meet various standards such as record keeping, and we're not going to get into all the details. I'm not sure that I care necessarily about you having all the details, but they got to keep records of injuries, okay, records of deaths that occur, accidents, illnesses, and particular hazards. And depending upon the industry that you're in, the record keeping may be a little bit different, okay? Now, for the most part, and there are a couple of exceptions that we can get into, but for the most part, all employees who work for an employer engaged in interstate commerce or in a business affecting interstate commerce are covered, okay? Say it again. For the most part, all employees who work for an employer engaged in a business affecting interstate commerce are covered. Now, from the first night or so, I know what Whitney's company is, and Whitney, you are in a business of
The tire and automotive shop.
you're a tire and automotive shop. Now, does the tire and automotive shop affect interstate commerce? Now, there are also other agencies that can engage in what we call preemption. So, and when I say preemption, what's that word mean? What's that word mean to you?
Precautionary?
Yeah, not really. Kind of. I
I
mean,
mean, like, act before somebody else acts.
there you go. Act before, yeah, Tom. Act before somebody else acts. All right. And basically, if there is a federal agency that puts on a specific regulation, that may preempt or take over what OSHA does. All right. So if there is a federal agency that says we're going to have this regulation in this particular industry, OSHA may not apply. Why would that be the case? Why would you allow a federal agency to preempt what OSHA, with another federal agency really, what OSHA wants to do? What's the reason for that? Who's going to know better about, for instance, let's take the transportation industry. Who's going to know better about the transportation industry than the National Transportation Administration? Okay? And so you get into those kind of areas. Now, here's what you have to have in order to have preemption, all right? Number one, in order to have preemption, the other federal agency must cover the working conditions with the purpose of protecting employees. Okay? They must cover with the purpose, must cover the working conditions with the purpose of protecting other employees. That has to be their reason behind it. They just can't have an agency out there that has laws that may affect, that has to be their purpose, is the agency must cover the working conditions. And the other agency must have exercised authority with regard to regulations. They must have actually promulgated regulations, put regulations in place, gone through that procedure. All right. That is the kind of umbrella, if you will, of this whole idea. That's the purpose of the Occupational Safety and Health Act. Now, within the Occupational Safety and Health Act, or that act, basically creates three types of agencies that you need to be aware of. Okay? There are three agencies really created out of this Occupational Safety and Health Act. The first one is the other OSHA that we refer to, and that's the Occupational and Safety Health Administration. OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They are the heart of the act, if you will. They're the heart of OSHA. Okay? They're the heart of the law. Their job is to promulgate standards, okay, conduct inspections, issue citations, recommend penalties. And they're the ones that are at the meat of what we think about OSHA. When you hear somebody on the street talk about OSHA is going to come in, you're talking about the administration, OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They're the primary enforcement agency. Jackie?
Issue citations and.
Issue citations, recommend penalties. Uh-huh. Yeah, they recommend the penalties. They're the ones, if you read I think there was a Trinity case that I set up, and if you want to see what happens when you get crossways with OSHA, read the Trinity case, all right, that we put in your supplemental material. Anybody that read that, tell me a little bit, anybody remember what that case was about? Go for it, Jackie.
It was regarding, basically, Trinity had an employee that reported that there were unsafe working conditions, and then OSHA wanted to go in and look at it. And the company had met 3 out of 4 requirements or standards for them to go in and do this broad inspection or whatever. And so they got a warrant to go in and look at it. But there was kind of a fight about whether or not, I don't remember exactly, but whether or not they could do the broad inspection and get the record keeping that they needed to. And so
Yeah. Yeah, as Jackie says, somebody makes a complaint, and that's how OSHA happens. Somebody, usually, not always, usually a disgruntled employee that hasn't gotten their way or has been fired. A lot of times it's after they've already left, okay? Because if they're really concerned, they can go to their employer, talk about it ahead of time or whatever. But usually you have somebody that comes forward, makes a complaint, and when they make a complaint, OSHA comes in and inspects it. And in the Trinity case, they were there on issue A, if you will, but they ended up on issue B, C, D, E, and F, all right? And it just shows you the wide power. Now, the court reined them in a little bit and said, you're not going to do all of that, all right? But it is an interesting case to go back and to read and kind of see the enforcement power that they have and what they think they have. Whitney's right. You want OSHA in there. If you can keep OSHA out, you want to keep OSHA, you probably want to keep OSHA out because it's a nightmare. On the other hand, do they perform a service that's productive? Sure they do. Sure they do. But if you get one of those investigations or inspections, it's going to be a real pain. But that's OSHA, the administration part, Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They primarily cover the promulgating of the standards, the inspections, the citations, the penalties, those types of things. Then you have what is called NIOSH, N-I-O-S-H, all right? NIOSH. And that is an acronym for National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. It is the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. Now, what NIOSH does is they do the research aspect of it, if you will. They're the more educational arm of the Occupational Safety and Health Act. Okay? So they look at the research that needs to be done. They provide the technical knowledge, if you will, to the administration so that they can determine what standards to promulgate, what laws to promulgate, what regulations to set forth. All right? That's NIOSH. And then your last main agency or group set forth under OSHA is the OSHRC. The OSHRC. And that is the Occupational Safety, Health, and Review Commission, or Occupational Safety and Health Review Commission. Okay. They're the ones who get involved in the cases like Trinity, all right? Because what happens is, if let's pick on Whitney for a little bit. If we go into Whitney's tire business, all right, and we're OSHA and we go in and look at their business and we slap a $100,000 fine on Whitney, well, she has to have somebody to turn to. And so she turns to the review commission. She appeals that penalty, and then it is the review commission that makes the decision, hey, OSHA, do you have this authority? Do you not have this authority? And then you work your way on up to the court level eventually. But the agency that initially looks at it is the Occupational Safety and Health Review Commission. All right? Any questions about the basics? That's the bare basics of the Act. I mean, we could spend months on all the technical details, but well, we're not going to. Okay? All right. So then you have what gets into the problems with OSHA, and I say the problems with OSHA, where a lot of the cases come out of, is what we call the standards. Because what happens with standards? Where do employers get crosswise with OSHA on the standards? I mean, why do we have to worry about what OSHA thinks or what the employers think in the standards? What's the issues there? What happens? Probably is not the most artfully worded question. Let me ask it this way. What does an employer think about a lot of OSHA standards?
Probably not happy about it.
Probably not happy about it. Okay. Jackie says probably not happy about it. And why?
It's a lot of control, it equals more paperwork and, you know,
Okay.
puts
What?
you at a risk for liability and things like that.
All right. And what is the number one goal? We already talked about it from day one. What's the number one goal of an employer?
Of an employer?
Of an employer?
Well, that means to make money.
Make money. Yeah. And so when you get OSHA making these standards, that makes it harder to make money. Okay? It's a lot easier it's a lot easier to run a machine, a saw, okay, an electronic saw without any kind of shield or automatic shutdown on it, right? Why? Because it costs money to add that shield. It costs money to add those safety devices, all right? So when you get into those standards, employers don't like them. But the Secretary of Labor has the authority to set these standards. Now, OSHA provides 3 types of standards that we want to cover in here, okay? We'll talk about in here. And let me give them to you and then we'll back up. You have what are called interim standards, I-N-T-E-R-I-M. These are what we call interim standards. You have what are called permanent standards. And then you have what are called emergency standards. All right? So you have interim, permanent, and emergency. And those are the 3 types of standards that you basically have of regulations promulgated by OSHA. All right? Interim standards are those that went into place during the first 2 years of the Act and just haven't been modified. They're still out there and will remain until they're modified, all right? Those are what we call interim standards. And they remain in place until made permanent, modified, or revoked, all right? Then you have what are called permanent standards. Permanent standards are newly created or revised standards that OSHA and NEOSH have worked together to create. Now, OSHA doesn't generally just go into a place out there and say, okay, here's the new standard. Here's what happens. Basically, you familiar with the Federal Register? It is the most boring piece of thing you'll ever read. But it's where all these regulations and standards are printed. And what happens is, OSHA will go out and say, okay, we're going to put a rule into effect. But they publish that rule in a book or a document called the Federal Register. Okay? It is the Federal Register. And most laws, not just OSHA, most laws go through this process of being, or most rules, regulations, if you will, go through this process of being in the Federal Register. All right? And so let's say we're going to have regulations on coal mining. All right? So OSHA says, hey, you know, let's go back to Jackie's dry cleaners. All right? We've got dry cleaners and we've got these chemicals and we've been looking, and NEOSH has come in place and told us, hey, there really is a problem we've done the research, there's a problem with these chemicals. So we need to set into effect new regulations. So here's what we're going to say. Your dry cleaning chemicals can't be more than 0.004 milliliters of this particular chemical. All right, and by the way, I'm just making those numbers off. So they say that's what it's going to be. Well, they don't immediately just write that law and then everybody's got to comply with it. They publish it in the Federal Register. Now, why do they bother to publish it besides the fact that they have to? What's the purpose of publishing it? Melissa?
Don't the people that it's gonna affect have
called public comment, okay? You have the right for public comment for 30 days, okay? I'll give you one that is not OSHA, and maybe we should save it for the ADA, but just because I'm going through it right now, we'll talk about it. Right now, the ADA and the Justice Department, you'll relate, is requiring what with regard to pools?
They have to put in a chairlift, and you have, there, for like a larger pool, it's gonna have to be, like 2 of them.
Right. Basically, the ADA is requiring right now that, and the Department of Justice is requiring that for these pools, you have to have what is a chairlift. And the idea is a good idea. There are people who are handicapped, who are disabled, who may want to be in the pool, but don't have a way of getting into the pool, all right? So they have created what is this chairlift, or they've created a regulation for the chairlift. Now, that's now law. It goes into effect January 1, 2013, all right? Now, having said that, what happened is before they ever said, this is the law, this is what you've got to do, they published it so people could comment on it. Same thing with regard to OSHA. They'll say, here's what we're going to do, and now you've got so many days to comment. And really, that's not just one of those things where the government says, you have the right to dispute this, and you go, yeah, right, I'm not going to get anywhere. They really do pay some attention to what goes on, okay? And so if they put this idea out there with chemicals and say you can only have so much per millimeter of this chemical, then at that point, that's what the law is going to be. So the people that are affected by that can come back and say, we don't like it, all right, or we don't want it. And so then they have hearings on that. They may have public hearings. They may go through that whole rigmarole, if you will, and then so many days, I think it's like 60 days after that comment period ends, or the close of the hearing, then there's got to be a rule issued. Now, I will tell you, it gets changed all the time, and it gets put back, and the laws are put into effect, and then they're changed, or they say you've got to do this by November 1, and then they'll move it back to December, and it's always a moving target. But that's the idea, and that's how standards become permanent. That's the whole process, if you will, of a permanent standard. You also have what are called emergency standards, okay? And these are these are standards issued when a secretary believes that employees are subject to grave dangers from harmful or toxic substances or other conditions. And almost always it's substances, because it's a lot, I mean, if it's just a piece of equipment, you can remove the piece of equipment. So you don't necessarily have to have, you're mainly dealing with substances this here.
Can you repeat that definition?
Yeah. Basically, emergency standards are issued when the Secretary of Labor believes that employees are exposed to grave dangers from harmful or toxic substances. Okay. Going back to our dry cleaning instance, we found this chemical. We are now convinced that this chemical causes it. You've got to replace this chemical with something immediately. All right? That would be what we call an emergency standard. You got to get it out. You got to get it out now. Or you got to add more water to it, or whatever the regulation is. All right? And the rationale for that is that this is so dangerous and so harmful that if we don't do something with it now, people are going to die. Okay? Now, generally, those are what we call emergency standards. Generally, they have to be made permanent and go through that process within 6 months once they're issued. Okay? So after the emergency standard is issued, it's put into effect. You may not have to have that. In fact, by the nature, you don't have that initial public comment because it's so important that you put it into effect immediately. But once you put it into effect, you have to begin the process of making it permanent. Okay? And when I say OSHA, the Secretary of Labor, and they generally have to do that within 6 months. The permanent standard generally has to be issued within 6 months. Okay? Now, what do you do if you're an employer, you're a dry cleaner, you're Glow's dry cleaner or whatever, and you don't like this standard? Okay? You appeal it. just like you can appeal a court case if you lose. You appeal the standard, and you file an appeal within the Federal Court of Appeals. When the court looks at that, here's what they're looking at, and here's what they're trying to judge. They're saying, is this standard necessary because of a significant risk of material health impairment? That's the standard. Is there a significant risk of material health impairment? If there's not, we don't need a standard for it. And the regulation or the standards issued must be the one that most adequately assures to the extent feasible that it's going to decrease the risk. All right? So you can't issue a standard that is overkill. Okay? Can't issue a standard that's necessarily overkill. But it has to be the one that is adequately assures to the extent feasible the decrease of the material risk or the alleviation of the material risk. Now, when we talk about feasibility, two key components there. Okay? Number one, when we talk about feasibility, we're talking about economic feasibility. And what would be the other feasibility that we'd be talking about? You got economic feasibility. What else? What if I issue a standard today that says, because of the screw-ups that we've all made over the last 5 years, you've got to immediately transport to 5 years ago and redo them? Is that a ridiculous standard? Why?
It can't be done.
Can't be done. All right? So not only is it economically feasible, it has to be technologically feasible. Okay, so when we look at feasibility, it has to be both economically feasible and technologically feasible. Now, a couple of things about this whole feasibility requirement. Number one, with regard to the economic feasibility, it doesn't mean, let me see if I can say this the right way, maybe we'll articulate it later. Economic feasibility doesn't prevent companies from going out of business. All right? If I'm a dry cleaner, let's go back to that dry cleaner. And if it's going to put me out of business, that may be too bad. That may be too bad. So when we talk about economic feasibility, it may threaten some firms, may threaten some dry cleaner firms, but it may not threaten all of them. And if it threatens the mom and pop dry cleaning firm, so be it. That's the way it goes. All right? So when we talk about economic feasibility, it doesn't matter that it may push a company out of business. When we talk about technological feasibility, it doesn't mean that the technology has to exist today. In other words, it can force the technology. And they can say, you've got to find a way to get this done. Okay? You've got to find a way to make saws safer. And even though we never have seen what is called a saw shield, if you will, or a barrier or guard, you've got to find one, you've got to create one, you've got to invent one. So, technologically feasible doesn't necessarily mean that it's available, that the technology is here right now, today. It just means that it's got to be something you can do. And just because not something nobody's ever done it doesn't mean that it can't be done. All right? Now, you can appeal the standard. The other thing you can do is ask for what we call a variance from the standard. And this happens quite a bit. Okay? Let's go back to our dry cleaning situation. You can say there is no way that I can make this chemical, get rid of this chemical today. But if you'll give me a temporary variance, I'll be able to find a substitute within 6 months. You make me switch today, I'm going to go out of business, I can't do it. But I'm asking you to give me 6 months to make this, to switch to a new chemical. And they can do that. Okay? they can give what is called a temporary variance. It can be granted for a year. It can be pushed back for a couple of periods on top of that. Okay. All right. Any questions about those particular standards? You can also ask for what is called a permanent variance. So temporary variance that says, hey, we're going to eventually comply. You can also get less likely, but a permanent variance. And a permanent variance can be granted when the employer can show that its alternative procedure provides a safe and a healthy workplace, as does OSHA standards. All right? So the permanent variance says we never have to comply with this law so long as we can show another procedure that's just as safe. All right? Listen, we're just creating things as we go along with our dry cleaning example. But let's say our dry cleaner standard is that we are not allowed to use this chemical whatsoever. Okay? That's the law. And let's say that we've got $1 billion worth of this chemical setting forth, all right, in our factory. And yet, because of what we do, we basically can run that chemical, if you will, through another procedure that removes the harmful effects from it, okay? You kind of see where we're headed with that. I don't know why an employer would want to do that, but if they did, all right, and they could show that it removed the harmful effects, then they could be granted a permanent variance. Okay? So a permanent variance can be granted when the employer can show, hey, we got another procedure, doesn't quite do what you do, but it has the same effect. Okay? All right, now, keep in mind this with regard to Occupational Safety and Health Act. There really is not a private cause of action for OSHA. Okay? Now, there's some whistleblowing, don't get me wrong. There's some whistleblowing, which means that if you've got a disgruntled if you've got a disgruntled employee who makes a claim, you can't do what to him? Can't fire him, all right? So there's some whistle protection, whistleblowing there. And based upon what we talked about earlier, if you were to be fired because you reported an OSHA regulation, I think you could bring a wrongful termination. I think the employee can bring a wrongful termination claim, all right? Because OSHA says, or the Act says, you cannot fire somebody just because they make a complaint, okay? OSHA also protects, to some extent, employees who refuse to work in a dangerous situation. And you'll see a few cases out there with this, okay? Let's go back to, let's stay with our dry cleaner, okay? You've got a college student that comes in that works on the dry cleaning, and they come in and they say, I'm not going to work with this chemical anymore. You got to get this chemical out of here, all right? For the most part, an employer cannot discriminate against an employee who refuses to work in a dangerous condition. Okay? Now, here's the key to that. Because a lot of times you get employees who say, don't want to do it, not going to work, this is dangerous. Has to be a reasonable test, reasonable person test. Would a reasonable person, under the circumstances, conclude that there is a real danger of death or serious injury? Okay? For instance, the chemical standard, probably reasonable, all right? Let's take that same person who's working at the dry cleaner and say, I'm not going to use hangers because if I use a hanger, it's going to poke me in the eye and I'm going to go blind. All right? Now, reasonable? Probably not. Okay? That in particular employee would not be protected. Now, having said that, let me say this. You don't have the right as an employee to just go out and file your own lawsuit against an employer to make the conditions better. All right? You don't have the right you can file the complaint, but you don't necessarily have the right to go out and to sue them, if you will, if somebody's not following OSHA. And generally, if OSHA doesn't want to take it, then OSHA doesn't necessarily have to. Okay? So there's really not that pure civil right that you have in other situations. Okay? OSHA is probably, and they're looking more and more at workplace violence. It's not really yet a standard, but what was the case? Was it, what was the second case that I put on the readings?
Golden?
Yeah, that's the guy in the union? Yeah, interesting case. What's that case about? Jackie, go ahead. Thanks for volunteering.
Basically, this guy was fired, kind of not through like the correct progressive discipline procedures as determined by the arbitrator, but his behavior was sort of erratic as far as like claiming other people harassed him, but then he was kind of endangering other employees by his own actions. And so he was fired, and it went to arbitration, and the arbitrator was like, look, he can be reinstated because your actions classify this as a Group B violation and you didn't follow progressive discipline. Therefore, he can be put back in place, and if you want to fire him, you have to go through that.
Right. Yeah, you have to go through these procedures. I mean, this guy was maybe a loose cannon, you know. I thought, boy, that's tough. That's tough. But that's what the laws require. That was the union agreement. That was their collective bargaining. We'll talk about unions later on in this class. But basically, the arbitrator came back and said, you know what? You've got to put him back to work. You have to reinstate him. I read a case today, very similar, where guy was cussing, creating what most of us would call a hostile environment, and yet the employer had to keep him. And because of some union requirements. So you've got that match, I think, that dispute and that conflict between what happens when an employer wants to get rid of somebody who may be dangerous, but you also have the union. And the reason I threw that case out there is, again, OSHA hasn't completely gone to the point that they're making workplace standards for bullying or whatever, but there's been talk about that, and they certainly have some regulation, and I say regulations, they certainly have some language that they suggest, you know, we want to watch out for workplace violence awareness. That's the nuts and bolts, if you will, of OSHA. There's so much more that we could probably cover and look at it, but we have a lot to cover in this class and areas, so I'm not sure I want to go much further. But with that in mind, any questions about OSHA, the standards, anything like that?